In this video, we'll be going over the lowest level spells that deal the most amount of damage, specifically going through level 0 to level 2 spells. And starting off at number 10, we have Toll the Dead and Poison Spray. Both of these are cantrips which deal an average damage of around 6.5 each, so they basically tie for 10th place. Now, Poison Spray is actually not that great of a cantrip despite its high damage die, because it deals one of the worst types of damage you can deal to the average creature, i.e. poison damage, and has a very short 10-foot range, and requires the creature to fail a Constitution saving throw in order to take that 1d12 damage. Constitution isn't the worst saving throw to target, but it's definitely not a good one, as most enemy creatures you'll be fighting have decent Constitution scores. Toll the Dead, on the other hand, is an excellent cantrip and probably one of the best. This one has a much more respectable 60-foot range, deals necrotic damage, which is rarely resisted, and targets a wisdom saving throw, which a lot of creatures have a low score in on average, so you're more likely to succeed. However, Toll the Dead only deals its 1d12 necrotic damage if the target creature is not at its maximum hit point value. So if you're hitting a fresh target with Toll the Dead, it only deals 1d8 damage instead, which isn't half bad, but it's not as good as 1d12. And none of the other single target spell cantrips have a damage die quite as high as these two baseline. Although a Warlock can take a couple of invocations to increase the damage of Eldritch Blast to blow all the cantrips out of the water when it comes to damage, but we're not including that on this list. However, I will absolutely include some special circumstances to some of these things, especially if it's a common circumstance that comes up a lot, like the next spot. And at number 9, we have a 3-way tie for Swordburst, Thunderclap, and Word of Radiance. All of these are cantrips which deal AoE damage to all targets within 5 feet of the caster. The damage they deal is only 1d6 of their associated damage type, and all of them require a saving throw. But if you're able to hit at least 2 targets with this ability, then it bypasses the damage of the number 10 spot, although only slightly. Technically, it's 2d6 damage compared to 1d12 damage if it hits 2 targets, but 2d6 damage deals higher average damage because of that additional damage die. So if you're in a situation where you have 2 or more creatures around you, and you don't want to use a spell-slotted AoE spell, or it's a whole bunch of really low HP targets, one of these 3 cantrips can beat out the damage of almost any single target damage dealing cantrip. And situations in which you are near more than one target is pretty common. So I think it's reasonable enough to assume if you're using this cantrip to its full potential, or even just half of its potential, it's definitely a high damage dealing ability. And I'll basically be counting AoE abilities based on how much damage they deal to 2 targets, because the whole point of using them is against multiple targets anyway, and it doesn't seem right to judge them based on their numbers to single target. And at number 8, we have Booming Blade. This is another cantrip, although this one works a little bit differently. Whereas part of using the cantrip, you have to make a melee weapon attack. And if the attack lands, then it will add booming energy to the target, which doesn't do anything unless the target moves willingly more than 5 feet, in which case they'll take an additional 1d8 damage. So if you use Booming Blade with one of the highest damage dealing weapons, like a greatsword or a maul, then you're basically adding the 2d6 damage of that weapon with the 1d8 damage of the extra damage, which gives us an average of 11.5 damage on average, which is actually more damage than if one of those AoE cantrips hits 3 targets. So you have to hit 4 or more targets in order to match the damage of one Booming Blade. However, this is assuming the target moves. So if the enemy you're fighting with Booming Blade just never moves from the location, then you won't deal any extra damage at all unless you hit 5th level. Because as soon as the damage dice for this increases, Booming Blade gains an extra effect where it will deal an additional 1d8 damage immediately with that melee attack, and then the booming energy will deal an additional 2d8 damage if they move. So below level 5, if the target never moves, then you're not doing more damage than just a normal melee attack. And since using Booming Blade counts as using a cantrip, you can't actually use Booming Blade with the multi-attack action. So you can only perform that one melee attack with that Booming Blade unless you have a way to cast extra cantrips in a turn, like with the Sorcerer's Quicken spell. And technically, Green Flame Blade also has the same benefits as Booming Blade, although it deals slightly less damage, or deals slightly more damage if the target never moves, because it basically has the same conditions as Booming Blade, where it requires you to do a melee attack when you use the cantrip, but it also deals an extra amount of fire damage to a different target within 5 feet, equal to your spellcasting modifier. So if you have a spellcasting modifier of just 1, then you'll deal 1 extra damage to one other target, which could technically be more damage than all of Booming Blade if the target never moves. And of course, these calculations are made using a heavy two-handed weapon, so there's no guarantee you'll be using a 2d6 damage dice with either of these. And at number 7, we have Guiding Bolt. This first level cleric spell, which simply requires an attack roll on a target within 120 feet. And if it hits the target, it deals 4d6 radiant damage, which is about 14 damage on average, and beats out a lot of second level spells in damage even. It also has a nice benefit where the next attack roll made against that target before the end of your next turn will have advantage. So the fact that it deals good damage and has an excellent benefit to it is pretty good bonus to the spell. It's not the highest damage dealing single target first level spell, but it's close enough and probably one of the best benefits out of all the other ones. I should also mention Thunderous Smite, which is a first level paladin spell, where as a bonus action you can enchant your weapon to make it deal an additional 2d6 thunder damage on your next attack that lands, and also have a chance of knocking the target 10 feet away and prone. So if you're using the maximum damage dice weapon like a great sword or maul, that's also 14 damage on average, just like Guiding Bolt. Although Thunderous Smite requires a bonus action and one of your actions, in addition to a melee range, but the effect will last on your weapon until you basically land one of your attacks, so it's kind of hard to waste the spell slot used on this ability, whereas if you miss with Guiding Bolt, that's it, you just lose that spell slot. And at number 6, we have Jim's Magic Missiles. This is a spell from Acquisitions Incorporated and requires you to pay 1 gold every time you cast the ability. And what it does is basically just double the damage of magic missiles, except instead of automatically hitting like Magic Missile does, it requires you to perform an attack roll for every target you want that magic missile to hit. And if any of these magic missiles rolls a 1 on their d20, then all of them will miss, blow up in your face, and deal 1 damage to you for each magic missile that exploded. So it technically has the potential to deal 15 damage on average, even more if any of them crit, as it deals an additional 1d4 damage on top of the double damage on those crits. But there is the risk that it will just do nothing and damage you instead. So overall, high risk, high reward, extra damage on crits, self-damage on critical failures, and the requirement of paying a gold for every cast. And at number 5, we have Inflict Wounds. This is another first level spell, and another one only usable by clerics, which deals 16.5 damage on average, although it requires melee range and a melee spell attack to land. So it's harder to use than Guiding Bolt, but deals slightly more damage, easily being the highest damage dealing single target first level spell in the game, and beating out pretty much all the other single target second level spells, like Melf's Acid Arrows, which only deals 15 damage on average. Clerics have some surprisingly hard-hitting single target spells. And at number 4, we have Scorching Ray. This is a second level spell which deals 21 damage on average. It is easily the highest damage dealing single target potential spell on this list, and is the only single target second level spell that beats the damage of Inflict Wounds, the first level spell. Although Scorching Ray kind of works like Jim's Magic Missiles, where you have to land 3 attack rolls in order to deal its maximum damage. You see, you can target up to 3 creatures with Scorching Ray, or the same creature 3 times or whatever, and then each creature will take 2d6 fire damage if that attack lands. So if you just put all 3 of them into one target, that's 66 fire damage. So Scorching Ray could kind of be considered an AoE, or at least a multi-target ability, but it's not going to do extra damage if you hit multiple targets. You're just splitting its damage between targets. There is a difference, because the next 3 spots on this list can beat Scorching Ray in damage if used on more targets. And at number 3, we have Burning Hands. This is actually a first level spell, which deals 3d6 fire damage to all targets that fail their saving throw within a 15-foot cone in front of you, which is only 10.5 damage on average. But if you hit at least 2 targets, then it matches the damage potential of Scorching Ray. And if you hit 3 targets, then it deals 50% more damage than Scorching Ray. And then it just keeps doing more and more damage the more targets you can hit, with it being able to hit around 6+ targets within its cone if they're all huddled together pretty tightly. It's not the biggest, best AoE in the world. In fact, most people call it one of the worst first level spells because of how small it is, and the fact that it deals fire damage, which is very commonly resisted or immune. But it is the highest damage dealing AoE at first level, and beats out the highest damage dealing single target second level spell by simply hitting 2 or more targets. And at number 2, we have Cloud of Daggers. This is a second level spell which only deals 10 damage on average, but has the potential to deal the most amount of damage out of pretty much all the other spots on this list. You see, Cloud of Daggers basically occupies 1 square, and any creature who enters that square or starts their turn inside of it will take 4d4 slashing damage. And what's notable about Cloud of Daggers is the fact that there's no saving throw. It's one of the few forms of automatic damage in the game, so you're guaranteed to land this damage if you throw it on top of something. Although when you spawn Cloud of Daggers, it won't actually do any damage until the creature starts its turn. Now, the damage potential of Cloud of Daggers comes in the fact that it can deal its damage once a turn, but not once a full round. And the damage can be triggered if you push the creature into the Cloud of Daggers. So if you simply just have your party members coordinate pushing a creature into a Cloud of Daggers on each of their turns, it will deal that 10 automatic damage each time your allies push a creature into it. Or if you just hold a creature inside a Cloud of Daggers, you can deal that 10 automatic damage every turn for 1 full minute, which is around 60 guaranteed damage. And since the damage potential of this is limited only by the amount of turns that your allies can push creatures into it, it easily has the highest damage potential of pretty much all the spells in this list, including a lot of really high level spells too. But the average group isn't going to be optimizing for a Cloud of Daggers damage, so it's more of an imaginary number situation, where the potential is there, but you're realistically not going to be doing it. Whereas it's pretty realistic to expect at least 2 or more targets to get hit by a Burning Hands, for example. So Cloud of Daggers is only a number 2 in this list rather than number 1, because number 1 spot is a little bit easier to hit its actual maximum potential. And at number 1, we have Shatter and Aganazzar Scorcher. These are 2 second level spells which deal AoE damage, and deal an average of 13.5 damage to each target hit. Shatter will hit all creatures within a 10-foot radius sphere, and Aganazzar's Scorcher will hit everything within a 30-foot line. So if you're able to hit at least 2 targets with either of these 2 spells, then it deals more damage than Scorching Ray, and obviously more damage than Burning Hands. However, as soon as you hit 3rd level spell slots, both of these immediately stop becoming useful, unless you only have 2nd level spell slots to spend, because both of them are just vastly worse versions of Fireball or Lightning Bolt. 2 3rd level spells, which deal about 2 times as much damage while also covering 2 to 3 times as much radius. Although at least Shatter has a unique damage type being Thunder, so that might be useful, including its use against destroying objects. But Aganazzar's Scorcher kind of has the same problems as Burning Hands, in that it deals fire damage. But at least it's a much longer range of 30 feet, rather than the pretty small 15-foot cone. Although since it's a line spell, that's also kind of hard to position for maximum AoE damage. But when it comes to highest damage dealing level 2 and lower spells, and without jumping through hoops in order to get the maximum damage like with Cloud of Daggers, you can't really beat Shatter and Aganazzar's Scorcher. Especially since you just need to hit at least 2 targets with either of them to outdamage everything else on this list, which is why they're at number 1. Alright, and that's the list. I made this as a better supplement to my video on spells which deal the most amount of damage total, because pretty much every spell in that video was 6th level or higher, which most players never get access to, since a lot of games never get to high levels. So, if you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, please subscribe to make my editor happy. He gets mad if I don't ask you to subscribe at the end of these.